Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar conversation between myself and Loy Searle today on the topic of breaking the concrete on inherited tech stacks. We have hopefully a very engaging and interesting conversation coming your way, one where we're going to ask for contributions in the form of questions. So as we move through our dialogue, our discussion on the topics that we'll discuss here in a second, please feel free to submit your questions as we go. And both Loy and I will be keeping an eye on that and bringing those directly into the conversation with us today. So in the panel on your GoToWebinar, you can see that you can add questions there. Really happy today to be speaking with my friend Loy. We've worked together both in a couple of companies from my side and at least 3 from hers. And this was a topic today that I think has a lot of different facets to it. There aren't super prescriptive ways of saying that this is the only way to do something or this is right, this is wrong. But hopefully we'll be sharing a lot of observations that we've had in the trenches. I know I've been in this business for slightly less than 30 and a little bit more than 25 years. So hopefully we can bring some perspective to that. I am VP of Solutions at WeLocalize, looking after an organization that's deep in the trenches on configuring our tech and our tech suppliers' tech on behalf of our customer programs. And over to you, Loy, a little background on yourself.
Sure. So I currently lead localization and InfoDev, another fancy name for content, at Workday. And prior to Workday, have been involved in localization and leadership roles, goodness, since like the 90s. So I started back in localization in ERP with a company called JD Edwards many years ago, and then had a handful of interesting rides along the way, including Google and Intuit, and a short stint on the entertainment side of the wall. So that's kind of my background. And I would say that I've inherited concrete in many places I have worked, and probably even created some of my own that others are still suffering from today. So I think it's a fun topic.
It is, and it's hard not to create a little bit, whether we call it concrete, maybe that's a metaphor that doesn't land worldwide, maybe it's a little Americanized, but you know, another form of looking at that would be tech debt. And I think it's important to realize that if you focus on minimizing that wherever possible, you're going a long way in the right direction, because there will never be, there will just never be that perfect portable piece of tech out there. So let's get started. Next slide, please. Just a quick grounding here. What we'll be discussing today is just kind of how to approach that inherited tech stack and instigate change as defined and as needed. How do you develop a roadmap for your localization tech stack? There's lots of implications there to future content streams and workflows that you want to be thinking about. How to tackle change management, and change management's a big part. You know, you have the tools part, but you got the people part that are using those tools, and you can change the tech, but you kind of have to change the mindset of the folks working with that, and a little bit about the politics and managing multiple stakeholders, and then wrapping up on some thoughts around future-proofing and anticipating the things that are going to be coming down the pipe in our world of localization. So Loy, does this look familiar to you? I think this is what we put together in 2001. I'm not going to name any companies.
Yeah, I think we started with something like that once, right?
Yeah,
I think
it's still working.
I think so. Mostly, right? Yeah. I think everyone who's ever gone into this profession has, if you haven't started with this, there were moments where you were in the middle of this, between automating all of the different handoffs with all the different teams. So yes, I love this picture. I think it describes the problem to solve.
Yeah, the problem to solve there, I don't see anything standards based, and like a lot of single points of failure. So yeah, well, let's if you all joining our webinar today, you know, I would imagine most of you have felt that this is part of the worlds that you've lived in the past. And so, well, let's break this apart and see if we can land on some best practices around whether you're just starting out or whether you're working in an organization that is well on its way on its global journey and may have a lot of pieces of tech already there. Lloyd, question for you. Have you ever been in a position where you got to start tabula rasa, just fresh slate and build it from the beginning?
I would say I have had the experience of starting from scratch, but I'm not sure there really is like a complete and total start from scratch, at least in the software space,
Yeah.
because you must shake hands with whatever product that you're working with. So there's usually some little thing or some bits in place. So I have had the pleasure of starting things pretty early on, but that doesn't always mean that it's easier, because sometimes the limitations of the product can be greater. So like I started something early on and the product was COBOL and there was a lot of hard-coded text. So like that wasn't really a gift to start from scratch in that circumstance. There was a lot of pain in that process. But yeah, if you can start fresh or moderately fresh, you can put a lot of things in place really early on. Like if you have the luxury of selecting your own TMS and figuring out, you know, what connectors you need to get and not inheriting, you know, a bunch of on-premise stuff that you have to update and change and maintain. It's a gift.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just illustrating up on the upper left side there, this is just in the form of a client environment, just a fictitious world where, and I think we'll talk about this in a little bit. I know it's popped up on our conversations. There are multiple content management systems in even smallish organizations, absolutely in larger ones, right? And you know, I think it's a pipe dream to think that there is one content management system that serves all the needs of the business. So that's always going to be out there, right? And
Exactly.
you know, and
Yeah, I
so
think, yeah.
go ahead.
I think every place I've ever been, we've dreamed of one CMS system, and I think the minimum that you can usually ever get down to is about 4 in any company. If you've got learning management, if you've got knowledge management, you've got tech pubs, and you've got marketing, if you got those 4 and you eliminated all the other 7 or 11 that you might have, you deserve a raise and a big promotion and a nice corner office, because that's
Yeah.
hard work.
It is hard work, and I think it's an achievable goal, but it's hard work because it
Yeah.
just makes sense from the business side. I've kind of put this together just to kind of illustrate a couple points. One is that, you know, whether you're working with Relocalize or another large vendor out there, they likely have you know, an ERP or a service delivery platform. Ours is called Pantheon, and man, that is a absolutely core essential piece of technology for us to do anything smart with for our customers around the ability to be predictive, to use the data. Our system generates an incredible amount of discrete data points, right down to the, you know, to the named resource, when they're picking things up, how they're proceeding. So it's always important to kind of separate the TMS from the business logic. We like to think of the TMS as the translator's workspace, and there's a lot of rich functionality in many of the TMSs that we use, but we kind of abstract that business layer out. So if a customer is coming to us new and they're like relatively new, we would stand up an environment that looks very much like this, where we would say, hey, you're going to get a world-class TMS at no cost to you. You're going to have a client portal for easy one-off project submissions, and we're also going to expose a variety of connectors. And the connectors is always a tricky one, right? Because connectors take a lot of configuration, and vendors can't do everything without a customer saying, okay, we have resources in each of these worlds here that are going to help get this instrumented correctly. But the goal, I think, here is that we don't want to lock customers ever into technology that they can't, that doesn't port, that doesn't allow them to go somewhere else, that doesn't isn't standards based. And so that would be our starting point. And I know that, like you said, you don't often get to start purely from scratch, but that would be what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then got, a typical customer hosted tech environment, and man, there's probably 40 versions we could put up on this one, but talk to me a little bit about how you see that tech infrastructure within your own organization.
Sure, sure. I would say to me there's some principles to apply around your tech environment. And so I would start with, do you really want to own and maintain all these things? So is on-premise something you really want to do? Back when I started in the industry, that was kind of it. That was your option. It was going to be on-premise. That was all we had. Today, I think the move is much more towards SaaS solutions. And my view is if you can buy it and it exists and it's in the cloud, then do that. And then integrate around it. Spend your energy, spend your tech hours and your tech resources on building awesome integrations and only creating the tooling that doesn't exist, that you need, that you can't buy. It ends up being a lot less to support over time. You won't have people whose job is just, managing painful upgrades and supporting strange things when things go wrong. You still will have to support your system, but it's nowhere near the level of effort. So that's a principle. I would start with that principle. And that has worked very well. And usually what that means is looking at your old on-premises legacy solutions. If you have one and it's working great, well, then that's not the problem to solve immediately, but that might be the problem to solve downstream, because it's usually where we end up spending the most of our investment is maintaining those systems over time. So I think that's the principle you start with.
Yep.
So spend your time integrating all the APIs that are out there for all of the standard deliverables that you're getting from your stakeholders. So that means, your AEM, Figma, whatever your content management systems are. And then your time is probably going to be spent a little bit more on some level of standardization for, if you're in the software space, some of those software handoffs. And I think it's an art, or maybe it's more of an art, I think, than a science. If you completely standardized every single inch of your engineering handoffs, you'll probably create something so rigid in the long haul that your partners don't want to play with you. So I do think that's a dance. I think that's a negotiation and a dance to figure out what are the three cookie cutter shapes that you accept, and what level of wiggle do you have in working with variation across those different structures.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, we're the world of software development and configuration is advanced to the point where we don't go away for a year and a half and build something to spec, we being the royal we, all of us in this group, like you might have used to in a waterfall world. Get your most important business case out there, your most important requirement, V1 it, get it out there and iterate, and that's what Agile allows us to all do. So fully hear you on that one. One of the questions we wanted to address was, how do I change my tech stack without breaking the important things? And I wanted to step back before we kind of like tackle that concept and say, why does an organization need to change? Like, why change your tech stack? There's a bunch of reasons for that. I'm just wondering, how's that in your world?
So I would say if you built a tech stack that was entirely autonomous of the systems that your company works with. So I come from mostly the software space. So that means there's a good chance there's integrated systems within whatever the software platform is that you deliver to. And I have worked with those inherited systems in a few different places. And the harder your work is, the more integrated your systems are with your company's core deliverable. So I think there's real power in getting your platforming outside of the core tool set so that you have flexibility to make changes that you need to make over time. That said, if it's working, do all the things you need to do outside of there first, and then approach the problems that you really want to solve. So if I think about a tech stack that's a pretty old tech stack, it's probably not got machine translations in it. If it's got machine translations, it's probably not got neural MT. It may or may not be set up for any AI that's coming down the road. I mean, even SEO. So all of the things that we've seen happen over the last, I would say, mature at least over the last 10 years, if your tech stack was done prior to then, you're not probably able to take advantage of those things very well. Or even something as simple as like, if you have a really old tech stack, do you have memory in it? It seems like an obvious thing, but are you integrated with translation memories? Maybe you aren't everywhere. Why? So these are things that I think when you can separate your tech stack from the core systems that you work with in order to do our work, there's goodness. That doesn't mean that you don't want to have a super glove tight connection or tooling when it comes to QA and that kind of work. That's where you really, if you can play in the product itself and do that work, that's super important.
Yeah, and we were talking about this last week, a couple things that popped to mind here. A lot of times I think the change can be instigated on the basics of data, right? It's like if that tech stack is not supplying you with business critical data, there may be a reason to think about modernization from that perspective.
Yeah, it can be, yeah.
And
I
from
think, yeah. I think the other piece of that is we often build tooling, especially in the old days. I think we built tooling to do the work. We weren't as data centric 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago as we are now, right? And so we didn't think as we designed everything, what is the important thing I'm doing here and what's the data I should get out of that? And or can we make it all extractable and all available? And that's essential now. I mean, you need every strip of data you can get to get support for business decisions.
Yeah, and that data is important for a lot of the historical things that we all do in the industry in our QBRs, where we're, kind of taking a rear view lens of that previous quarter, where we've had successes, where we've had challenges, and it's more of an aggregation of like words, TM leverage, number of languages supported, all that stuff, right? And that data is good, and we need that data. But to your point, more and more we're thinking around the lines of having ML come into play for decision support and having recommendation engines, for instance. That requires data, and the only way you can use ML concepts to help fast-moving project teams, both on our client side and our side, manage the exceptions instead of managing all the mundane tasks is, let's bring in some ML and let's guide them on
exactly. Like your community is a good example. I think many of us translate community content or have community content on our docket, and it's usually just an endless amount of content that is possible out there. And we get stakeholders saying, translate community. It's sort of like, swallow the ocean. And ML, machine learning, is some of the only way, between machine learning and MT and monitoring what's out there, what's getting usage, what is getting adoption from your customers, really can help drive what you do next. So if I have something that's getting a lot of hits, then I know I better post edit that. And that's not okay that it's just machine translations. That probably should have a good post edit. If nobody's looking at that document, I'm not going to spend any money translating that document. But I will make certain the indexing is right. I've done all the right SEO so that the things that are out there are findable in any language so that you can manage that process. But yeah, there are ways that we can work today that we couldn't work 20 years ago in terms of our decision making about what we translate and when we translate it, the moment we translate it, and whether or not it's worthy of a human review or it's not. If it's a blog and somebody just wrote it 10 minutes ago and it's going to last 15 minutes, MT might be fine for that.
Oh, absolutely. And again, another application for machine learning concepts coming in to dictate the workflow. So to your point, if we have a variety of pilots running on what we call smart or predictive LQA, and so we've got a lot of algorithms that are able to look at that content and say, hey, based on the content type, based on the expected outcome of this content, this shouldn't even be reviewed. client does not need to review that. And of course, we work with our customers to put these business rules into practice. But that's a really great way to have the machine and to have the automation take that package of work and put it right down the rails to the right workflow. So everything doesn't go through LQA, everything doesn't have to go through client review.
Yeah, you can make good decisions about it. Yeah.
That's
And I
right.
think a lot of that is just respecting the people in our profession and the way they spend their time so that they can do it on the things that are most valuable, that have the most impact, and they're not spending their days in point and click, and they're not spending their days doing something that no one's going to see or
That's
that
right.
two people are going to see.
I think you mentioned when we were chatting two main drivers being headcount and speed. And I think we've kind of touched on that here a little
Yeah.
bit, but really at the end of the day, the question of why do I need to break out a jackhammer, destroy this either good, slightly good, terrible system, break it apart and rebuild it, it typically comes down for you to headcount and speed. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. If so when I'm looking at automation that we've had in place,
Mm-hmm.
my first thought process is what should be automated that's not. You know, what are our common workflows that should be automated where we have those handoffs automated? And I first go after, and this is kind of how we're organizing ourselves, we first go after what's not automated and should be. Before I go up completely undo a tech stack or change that, first you automate all the things that should be automated and you get the things that are out of control into a nice level of control. So your people can focus on the right things, relationship, engagement, you know, making certain that things actually work beautifully and smoothly and planning, that kind of thing. Then I would look at the older stack and say, what should we do here? What are the opportunities? And usually the older the system, the more limited it is in different approaches. So can you deliver in an agile manner like many products are being done today? You know, can you do a daily drop? Can you do an every other day drop? Can you do a weekly drop? Does your tooling support that? If it doesn't, that is often a real compelling reason. And it's usually an easy business case to leadership to be able to make your technology more agile if your teams are working in a more agile manner. And I would say the other piece is that in our industry, if we don't have automated handoffs, if we've not worked the handoffs and the workflows in such a way that they're deeply automated, that means people. That means we're hiring lots of PMs, and it means our PMs are not doing jobs that are probably the most rewarding jobs for them. They're pointing and clicking, they're digging through directories to make certain they've got all the right files, they're making certain that French didn't get mixed up with Japanese, they're spending their time doing things that machines are good at, and they could be spending their times on things that are way more interesting than that are a better use of smart brains and talent. So that I will caveat this, I have never made a case for automation that you would eliminate headcount. That's not the point of it. That is never the point of it, because if you automate things like crazy, you probably still will grow your headcount. They just won't be working on the same things. They'll be working on onboarding a lot more products, a lot more capabilities, a lot more types of things. You'll be able to say yes to a lot more work from the company that you work for. So it's not about elimination of resources. It's about getting the resources into the more strategic, more impactful work, and letting the machines do the things that humans want to shoot themselves if they had to do day in, day out.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And we're fundamentally going through, you know, on our own digital transformation journey, which, you know, depends on the lens that we're looking through. Some days it feels like we've traveled a long distance, and in other days it feels like we've got a long way to go. But one of the things that I think institutionally at We Localize, at least, we're working with our teams around is just that concept that, you know, project managers are vital. And they're, you know, and we have fantastic teams in our organization. And I know that sometimes the concerns out there are like, well, what parts of my job will be automated? What will I do? It's like, and the more we move on that journey, the more people are going like, wow, I get to upskill around this stuff. I get to step back and think about creative ways I can use data to improve the customer experience. And that's a pretty fun thing to be a part of that transition. But it
Yeah.
sounds like the same for you all.
Yeah, I feel like that's really a big part of our job, is to automate as much as we can that is not rewarding work and or is low value work, and use our talented folks on the things that they're really great at. So yeah, and it's a journey. Like, we're not there yet. It's a journey to get to automate all of these bits. And I would say the aspiration that I've always had is the 80%. If you can automate 80% of your workflows, that's fabulous. There will always be a good 20% of things that are ad hoc, unpredictable, may not happen again, happen once a year. There is a place of where it makes no sense to keep automating. Like, there's a place where if I'm going to get 3 of these a year, it is probably not worth the engineer's time to automate around this thing that might happen 1 to 3 times a year. That doesn't make sense. So the automation should really be focused on the continuous things that you're doing, the things that are regular, the things that are predictive, and the standard stuff you can expect to see. So that 20% is a goal. It may be an aspirational goal. It may not always be achievable in certain environments, but I think that the tricky part is to stop when you've reached a place of madness and you're automating just because you can, but like you're never going to see that project again. Why?
Or don't start that madness if you're looking at something. It is like this system is going to generate 1 drop a month or 2 drops a month, and you're sort of like, we want to stand up a connected environment where it's going to be a lot of resources making sure that those pipes continue to flow the content. So I think it's really that.
Yeah.
And we'll see a lot of requests but at the same point in time, a lot of the connector infrastructure that's out there with the TMSs that we're using, as much as I will say, on one hand, connectors have an overhead cost associated with them that needs to be looked at, against the volume of transactions. A lot of them are really getting to the point where they're fairly stable. And so maybe the proof point isn't that there's only 2 drops, but it's the amount of work in that native environment. Like, let's just say it's AEM, for instance.
Yeah.
The amount of work that the content creators, because their day job's creating good content, it's not managing the localization of it. So part of it is to help them. And so localization, we talked about this the other day. I love this business because we get to work with so many different groups, stakeholder groups within customers. I think you share that opinion as well, right? So you can institute change and help people.
Yeah, and I do think that is like the magic in our space, is that if you have the luxury to be a center of excellence type organization where you really are serving the whole company and you're not just focused on one team or something like that, you get to see the whole business. You get to see what every part of the business is trying to do and what they're accomplishing. You're the little microcosm that makes it possible for every part of the company to be in each of the locales that matter. That's fun. I think that is the magic special sauce of our work, is getting to work with all the different teams in a company and getting to see all that work come through and understanding the business at that kind of a level. You wouldn't normally get to do that unless you were like, an SVP. Yeah. And then you get paid the big bucks and you have all the big challenges. So we get to do this at a PM level. We get to do this at almost every job level within our organization. We get this awareness of what's going on in the business that I think is really kind of unusual. Most parts of the business only know their silo.
Yeah, because content lives everywhere, and it's certainly growing. That 80-20 rule that you mentioned earlier, I think a great segue into kind of one of the, as we kind of move through the agenda today, the strong and defensible case for change, the how do you future-proof? And we just scratched the surface earlier on this, but I think to me what future-proofing is stepping back and realizing that the world of localization that we've known for quite some time, that content is moving in different directions. So to create a multilingual chatbot requires a different work surface. There are different tasks, different linguistic tasks involved in doing that work, creating the derivations of utterances and annotating those, ascribing metadata to them to allow those multilingual chatbots to be generated. And TMSs are, it's a challenge to fit those new work streams in
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I think machine learning is a really interesting space. I think SEO is really similar space to machine learning, where you don't just have a one for one. All of the paradigms that translation tools were set up on, 20, 30 years ago when we started were based upon I got this one thing and I will do this one thing on the other end of it in each of the languages. And we've automated all around that in our TMS systems to do that fabulously. And then comes along SEO, and then comes along machine learning, and those things don't fit. You need one to many, many to one, and our tooling is it's not there yet for this area. I think there's a huge opportunity. I mean, I think it's also a new space. So there's not even a lot of tooling in the source area of this that it hasn't standardized. So no surprise we've not done anything on the language side, but I do think this is a huge opportunity space to
Yeah,
leverage the the capability that we have, but also manage all the variants that can come through while we're working with our counterparts to help train the machine learning. And I think that's another space that we have a tendency as a profession to see meet the machine learning guys that have joined our company and run and duck and hide and hope they don't like come into our space. And that is not, I think, the best way to work with those guys. I think the opportunity is to reach across the aisle and help train
yeah,
the machine learning in all the languages. We'll learn a new skill in this. We will absolutely, this is a new skill. I assure you it is a new skill.
yep,
And we'll learn a new skill in this and help them train in language faster. And from that, we'll get some benefits and we'll continue collaborating in this space. So it's only a threat if you want it to be a threat. I really think it's a huge opportunity for us as a profession to train our people in new ways. This is work that humans need to do a lot of this work.
yeah,
So
great. Yeah, and I just reflect back on so much of the translation, CAT work surfaces really, and right from the ownership of many of the TMS companies, it came out of the translator community. There was awareness of a translator of like what good tech looked like for them. And I
mhm,
wonder, it'll be interesting to see the world of, AI enablement and multilingual AI enablement and
mhm,
all of the needs associated to a work surface there. Like, translators made, for better or for worse, some great TMS environments to get that kind of work done. And it's sort of like it's multifaceted here. There's a lot of folks in the MLAI space that are, it's a commingling of the linguistic worker that's going to need to
mhm,
do that probably has a preordained idea of what they think is good. But then there's the folks training the engines and the AI and AML experts, and they're like, yeah, well, we're going to have to come together on this one because it's just a different world. It really is. And
yeah,
we're working together on several different approaches to say, okay, well, instead of a one to one, we can get a one to many by duplicating, all of the source strings because we want the same translator or linguist. I'm actually going to use the word linguist here because, it's more that than translation. So they need to see
mhm,
every one of those to prompts to generate a variety of utterances around it. So the workflow is different, the work surface is different, and I'm sure that there's a lot of folks in the industry that are working to crack this problem. But I also
yeah,
think that I know We Localize is looking, though we don't develop a TMS system, we like to use best of breed. We do have a significant development organization that's looking to always problem solve around a standards-based approach to doing something well. And work surfaces are definitely in our purview along
yeah.
those.
And this is a space that I think really needs it. It could use some good thinkers, and probably if great tooling was born in this space, there would be a lot of companies that would be happy to use it. Because right now it's pretty much a human space. I mean, I think a lot of what's being done is either pure machine or pure human or a strange combination. But a lot of this work to start is very human. As it goes, you get much more of the machine engagement. But to start, you kind of need people who understand the language, who understand the locale, who
Yeah,
know the difference between a typo and an intentional phrase and common typos that you might make to help train
And
the
that you
engine,
want
things
to
like
make,
that,
because
Yeah.
yeah, and typos that you want to make, because what this is, a lot of this stuff is just around search and chatbots, and like
Hmm.
we all typo, or when we're asking Siri or Alexa for something, and it's like, you have to actually have common errors in these files to
Yes, or it
right.
won't train properly. Yeah, so perfection. And this, I think, is the tricky space for us as an industry, is we pride ourselves on our perfection.
Mhm.
And so what is customer facing and what might be seen as an output through machine learning, it has one set of criteria and has a bar to meet, but what is training the engine itself is a completely different beast. And that requires, throw in the kitchen sink and everything else you've got, because it requires a lot of different things in order to imagine what people might search for, what they might look for, what mistakes they might make, all that madness.
Yeah, right down to the A/B testing in social media around SEO concepts, and so it's a variety of ways I think TMSs are doing it right now that we can all instrument around. But I do feel like we're at an inflection point in the industry where I'm not going to bet and say how much of our revenue is going to come from linguistic work around AI enablement
Hmm.
versus additional localization, but I absolutely, that's just the handwriting's on the wall. That's growing immensely, and it will continue to grow.
It's certainly the early work right now with chatbots and everything like that that are kind of taking over lots of products.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Lloyd, I'm looking at the questions box, and I'm not seeing anything coming in yet.
Maybe
We
no
are at the
questions.
point in time where we wanted to see if the folks on the webinar today had any questions. So just remind folks, you can submit them from the toolbar for GoToWebinar, and we'll continue to keep our eyes out for that. What are some of the other things we wanted to talk about? I'm kind of looking at my list here. I know that we've hit on a lot of them. Let's circle back on the ideal line in the sand between client side, customer side tech ownership and the tech that you would expect be owned by your vendor or
Got
vendors.
it. I think this is to me, this is an interesting conversation because it has a lot to do with where are you in your business and what type of business are you in. If you are in the software business and you're managing software and localizing all of that, odds are good you're going to have a higher level of tech ownership, because one, you've got a whole bunch of engineers in your company, so it's probably pretty easy for you to say, hey, I think I need a few engineers to automate my process. Nobody would think that was unusual in a software environment. They would be expecting you to automate your process. But if you are in the space where you're not a tech company, maybe you're a marketing company, or maybe you're a medical company, or
Mhm.
maybe you're a banking company, like maybe your business is not, when you look behind you in your organization, the only engineers you're seeing are in IT. If that's your space, it's going to be a lot harder to make the business case for engineers to automate your handoffs and automate your processes. In
Mhm.
which case, I think if that's your setup, your first go-to place is probably talking to your vendors and seeing what they can help you with. But I also think there's another space you can look at. So I think you can, I'm sure this is probably one of the areas, Darren, right? You guys probably do a lot of that. You handle a lot of that kind of automation for the non-tech sector localization folks, right?
Yeah, especially those, and oftentimes many times very global organizations that don't have as deep or rich of an internal localization department as you've
Mm-hmm.
run in all of your previous lives, and yet they still have those same challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I always feel for them, it's like it comes from procurement, and the challenge out there is like, how do we do this when we don't have a really big team? And I think that that's where a lot of our creativity comes into play, solutioning around that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stakeholders, like, we can have deep relationships with our customers' local teams because they have deep relationships with all their stakeholders. And this is sort of like us having to come in and go all the way out there. And I enjoy those interactions. We have a bunch of them going on right now. We learn a lot along the way, and our customer stakeholders learn a lot about localization of what they're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah. I
Um,
think the tricky part of that though is when you want it, when you know it can be optimized, but you would have to somehow broker that relationship
yeah,
within. And how do you do that?
that is a very good question. I think about
Can you
that.
do that?
How about if I answer it this way? Very carefully, very
Yeah,
carefully,
yeah.
because those are relationships that are oftentimes established around a requirement, right? So whether it's procurement or whether it's another department, hey, we've thoroughly vetted all of the great LSPs out there, and we've made a choice to work with Relocalize. Let's say that's the scenario, right? Well, there's a whole bunch of stakeholders out there that probably were informed and maybe
Hmm.
were asked for opinions and maybe just felt like, oh, we would have preferred, company X or company Y. Now you got to do business with them and help
Hmm.
them solve their problems. And so it's always a slippery slope. It's just a really fun human part of the job that I like,
Hmm.
bringing in technology and people together on that front.
Yeah.
Hey, a couple questions popping in here, Loy. The first
Oh,
one I
okay. Let's see.
through to you, and I love this one.
Uh,
Which TMS does Workday run today? If you can
we
share
are.
that.
I will tell you that we are in process of migrating to a new TMS. And when I say we are in process, I mean we have weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings. We are in process right now, and we're migrating to MemSource. There are some great tools out there right now, so it wasn't a super easy choice, but it was the best choice for us in our evaluation right now.
Yeah.
Let's see. As you've been at several companies, what's been the biggest learning for you with regards to creating and implementing a globalization tech strategy? The first learning is there's a few things that I would say I've gotten out of this, and it's nice to hear from you, Lorna. One of them is that you can't do anything if you don't have some support from your leadership. So, there's only so much you can do with what you've got in terms of budget and resourcing. So if you really need to do an overhaul, a business case is in your future. Okay. If you think you can incrementally work a transformation without adding a lot of resources, that's great. But that's harder, that can be much harder to do. So I think your first step in this is almost always, if you look at your tech stack and go, oh my goodness, we're missing our deadlines, we're not making our customers happy, the quality is poor, whatever the reasons might be, you have to probably pull data together, perhaps to make a business case to improve, upgrade, or shore up your tech stack. If you can do it with your budget, yay, go for it. You're a free person, enjoy. So I think that's your number one thing, business case. Number two thing, make certain that you actually have the talent on your team to do it. So you may have to hire resources. And I think one of our challenges in the localization space is I really believe from a technical standpoint, we need people who know our industry crazy well. We need tech folk that know localization, but we also need tech folk that know our tech stacks within our companies. So we need good engineers in general. So to me, a perfect team mixes the competency of great engineers that anyone in your engineering department would have wanted to hire and the people that really know localization well, because those guys working together will solve problems in a different way. They will solve problems in a way that will help you leap ahead. So balance your team out. If you've not got a balanced team, balance your team out. And the last thing is be thinking, go ahead.
No, I was
Yeah.
just going to say before we jump to another question, if you can kind of double click on any experiences you've had with shared resources. So, kind of like dotted line. They're in the development org, but they're also a dotted line over to localization. Good, bad, or any experience there?
Yes, great while you are in the middle of the project. Generally great while you're in the middle of the project. Nightmare material when the project is coming to an end and you've got your MVP in place, because that's usually when they get pulled off.
Yeah.
So I've definitely had that experience, and you need to pitch for the fact that this is not a one and done team. You're not going to finish the platform and then all those engineers can go away and just need one or two to babysit it. You are probably going to need a certain level of engineering on your platform over time to be able to keep innovating as new things come your way. Your engineering team isn't stopping. If you're in the software business, they're not stopping. So you need to be able to meet them where they are. So that's my worst experience with shared resources is the minute they think they're done. And you're left with the alpha product.
Let's take a look at that third one. I love what Lois said regarding outsourcing to experts when possible. There's a lot of open source code out there. What do you say to development organizations that decide to develop their own code as it relates to MT? These people are not in the language industry and are just trying to save money.
You don't know them. You will know them. You will know those people. Since the advent of MT, I would say, I have in every place I've ever worked, there will be engineers who will directly hook their stuff up to MT. They will never knock on your door. You may not meet them. You may not see them. You may not even know there is work out there going directly to MT. They probably don't know the difference between, say, the open cloud MT, where all of their IP is going out in the open cloud. And so that might be an area that you might want to educate on, like, hey, do you really want, all Google users to be able to find our stuff accidentally in there, in their MT suggestions? Maybe not. They probably don't know what's possible within your organization to help train those MTs and make them much more appropriate for your industry. And they're probably just wanting something fast. And there's a good chance they speak English. They may not speak any other languages. So they see it looking like it's in another language and think, problem solved. They don't realize that they might have just created nonsense for your internal stakeholders.
There's no corrupted characters, so it must be good. Yeah.
Must be good, right? Looks like Spanish to me, right? I put it through Google Translate, came out the same. Must be great, right? So I do think they are a big part of our education. They are the place where you want to put your PMs to go have those interesting conversations with those guys about how MT is great. We can leverage MT. We can use MT to plug in and streamline processes. Maybe if they needed something for, something that might change tonight, that's an urgent customer thing that you would want to put MT on tonight and fast follow it tomorrow with translation or the next day. If you're driving those services in your organization, you're in control of it. And it's really important that you have enough management over the repositories that if people put MT in the product and it's product that you should be translating or that you're making choices around that, you can tell that they've done that so that you can identify those strings. So usually we would want some kind of an indicator, metadata, whatever, that says this has been MT but not reviewed. Things like that, so you can track the work.
Those use cases that you're describing can be supported very easily. It's like, okay, if you want to automatically push all of your strings every time you make a commit and get them MT'd for UAT testing or for whatever, or even just go live, it's like you can still facilitate the requirement. They don't have to do it themselves. They're still going to make a call to an endpoint for an API, for an MT response. So I like that.
And that is something we should own. As an organization, our team should own that. Then we can manage the quality on it. Because my experience is I'm on the hook for that quality, whether I do it or not. They're going to blame our team. Whether we did it or not, they're just absolutely going to blame our team if the quality is bad. So best to go after that, try to own it, and give them something they don't have. Give them an assurance of quality. Give them a process that doesn't get in their way but supports what they're trying to do, but also allows you to take the ownership for the quality, which I think that's really important. That's what we exist for, that reason.
Totally.
What else did we get?
Okay, here's another good one from Paula to Loy. How large is your internal team and what are the specific roles?
So we have a good sized team. We have, it's an ERP product, so there's in fact a lot of product and products within that team, as well as we're starting to really ramp up a lot more content deliverables. I think we are around 70, 75, upwards of that. It also includes within our organization a team that is part of the development of internal tools for our product itself, for things that are, how do we properly globalize our products, those kinds of things, customizations and address formats and stuff like that. So I have an engineering team that probably not all, if you weren't in the software business, you might not have a team like that. And the team is basically organized by program management, platform. So all of our engineering platforming groups for localization tooling, as well as for our global tooling, and language services. So that's the fairly standard. I think that's a fairly standard structure in our industry.
Hey, here's another good one. Thank you to Lloyd for sharing all this useful information. I concur. How long will it take for Workday to move from its current TMS system to MemSource? What's your roadmap look like, Lloyd?
Okay, so our roadmap, we have 6 months that we feel is kind of our tight engagement in the process. Mm-hmm. Until we've pretty much worked all of the different types of things that we're going to be doing through MemSource, like as at least a single case test, that kind of thing. The reality around integration is, just like I said, there's no one and done with your development. We will never be done. We will always be updating and adding things. So the 6 months is where we hope to get through all of the initial touch points and handoffs working smoothly in the process, and then we'll start testing it with more volumes and tweaking from there. So yeah, we will never be done, because there is no done when you're integrating with solutions, but that's the big lift should be about 6 months.
But you'll eventually retire the other TMS.
Yeah, I will be done someday. I will be old, and they will retire me.
Yeah. Along with the existing concrete that you worked so hard.
Exactly. And somebody else will say, why did she do that? Goodness.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you think about shifting TMS systems, and the industry is largely, centered around some standards. I can't not jump in with this notion of, move from TMS system 1 to TMS system 2. They're both TMX compatible. They both have these TM databases that should port between them. But then we also know the uniqueness around certain tagging and attributing that puts those words into buckets that we may or may not like, right? So the aspect of making the move of the TMS itself from one to the other, that's relatively easy. The challenge is all the connectivity into your content streams that used to go to your old TMS system that now need to seamlessly move into the new one. And I think would you agree, that's the long pole in the tent?
Yeah, and fit, so when you're looking at TMS systems, which ones look like they will fit within your tech stack and what you're trying to build best? Will they solve for all of your unique use cases? If our business was a pure marketing business, maybe we would have made a different decision on tech stacks. Yeah. So I do think it really matters what you're doing, so that you're aligning your tooling with what your business requires, similar to how you make your decisions on how you pick your vendors and all of these things. Your business is going to be unique in some ways, and you tease out what is unique about your business, and don't just go get the one big thing that's out there. You figure out what's the fit for your business.
Yeah, and we certainly work a lot with MemSource, and we work a lot with XTM and others, and there's just a lot of great modern cloud-based TMSs out there.
Yeah, tooling's improved a lot over the last few years.
Yeah. Along the same lines, Estella asks, what are some of the steps that you all, Workday, are following to make the TMS change? So maybe high-level Gantt chart items, or however you want to
Yeah. So if I just I'll be very simple in this. Can the new TMS currently handle the manual flows? So that would be one. Can we get all of our manual flows in there? Can it handle all of those? That's one. Can we validate each of our automations, the core automation steps, that those will work? Do we have our quality? Can we set up the quality measures that we want to use within the system? Can we manage the client interactions that we need to. So when we have SME reviews and things like that, so the workflows and the connectors to the various tools on how we send our work through the process and might get a SME review back and implement those edits, things like that. So that's just a handful of them. I mean, we've kind of got this little Gantt chart from hell that is actually still very much in process in terms of all the levels of details underneath it. We've got kind of like the high level tasks, and then underneath it's like, it's a lot.
Hey, Marianne asks a follow-up question. I love this one. We just maybe scratched the surface a second ago. When
Yeah.
you the new TMS system change, isn't there a loss of leverage being segmentation is most likely different? Do you build that cost into your business case? And if so, do you get pushback? You answer that part, and then I'll follow up.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, there is always, if you switch TMSs, in spite of the fact that there are standards out there, those standards are still, after all these years I've been in this industry, it's still not 100%. You're going to lose something in that process. You can put a bunch of engineering time to try to get every last little bit of that in there, but there is a place of diminishing returns where it's probably not worth it. So I do think you kind of look at like, this will get us to this place, and below this, I'm maybe not using my engineers' time the best way that I can. Part of our thought process in doing this now is we were not deep into content yet. We had not done a tremendous amount of content, and almost all of the tooling that we had was in our platform that's integrated within the systems that we have. That's more of a legacy platform. So we are literally starting to do a whole bunch of new work. So we will probably never be at a better place to implement a TMS as a team in terms of not losing a ton of things, because we've got a lot of things that we're doing that are new, that are coming our way. You probably will not have that luxury. You need to build it into your business case, and there should be some really good tick marks on that new TMS that make that case make sense. I have many friends who've gone through the process of doing the numbers and then said, now we're just going to stay where we are.
You know,
and folks that have moved on. So like the math probably does need to make sense.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that, I mean, we can fully relate to this, not only because we see a lot of customers in that same position of for one reason or another needing to, make that migration from one TMS to another, but also internally. As many people know, we open sourced GlobalSight many years ago, and GlobalSight is probably one of the oldest TMS platforms in existence. And in doing that, and the reason we did that is because that tech needed to be, that code just needed to be retired. It wasn't going to get us to some of the modern features that we were talking about earlier. And in doing that, we had to spend a lot of time on that topic of how can we ensure the largest amount of leverage moves into the new TMS. I would to Marianne that asked that question, and anyone else, work with your LSP. The team that I run here get heavily involved in finding that 80-20 or 90-10. There's going to be a long tail, right? Of can I get every last segment? No, you're not, and there's a diminishing return on that investment of effort.
Yeah.
But we will spend a lot of time working with our customers and massage that. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with our localization engineering teams, my solution architects, Olga Bergovaya's ML team. We can come together and find ways to do some cleans, run some rules, and take what would generally be a TMX to a TMX with a large leverage loss to one with a pretty small one and a palatable one. That's what we find anyway.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good question.
We're 1 minute past, Lloyd, and we don't have any other questions in the ticker. I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us. It's always a joy.
Thank you, Darren. It's always fun. Darren and I prepped on this, and we basically realized we could just keep talking forever. So it's probably good to make us stop at some point.
That's right. And normally it's not me self-imposing that on myself, if anyone knows me. We've got a keep in contact slide up here. So let's keep the conversation going. You can reach out to Loy, LinkedIn. You can see her handle there as well as mine. Look forward to speaking with any of you in the future. And Thanks again so much, Loy.
Thank you, Darren. You guys have a great day. Cheers.